our next presenter, we actually have two presenters. One will be here with us in the room. The other will be joining digitally. Will be Tom Thomas, who joined us earlier. Tom was obviously on the panel. Already gave a little bit of a bio about Tom, but his team and his mission is to provide data solutions that help people, particularly making more intelligent decisions within FordDirect, the Ford and Lincoln dealerships. I'd be remiss if I didn't say Tom also has his MBA from the University of Michigan here in Ann Arbor. He's also going to be joined by Jonathan Prantner, who's the Chief Analytics Officer for RXA. Jonathan is essentially, he's a teacher, he's an innovator, he's the wizard behind the curtain. His approach to applied mathematics has pushed analytics over the limits for the past 2 decades, working with organizations like FordDirect, like Nielsen, and many others. So with that, they will be talking about where to spend your next dollar, your media optimization at FordDirect. So Tom, please, I'd like to have you back up here. And Jonathan, welcome. Good to have you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Put your notes there. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. What John and I are going to talk about today is how we're working together to essentially take on the common yet complex problem or challenge in digital marketing and advertising, and that is how do we apply multi-touch attribution and media mix modeling to digital advertising for automotive dealerships so that we can help those dealers figure out where to spend their next advertising dollar. Okay, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so a little bit about FordDirect, as I mentioned before. We are a joint venture between Ford Motor Company and the 3,800 dealers or so in North America. What that means is basically we are majority owned by Ford and majority controlled by the dealership. So it's a very unique entity that sort of sits between, the OEM or the Tier 1 corporate entity and all those dealership the dealership franchise network, we're essentially that primary digital marketing solutions provider for the entire dealer network. And in a nutshell, our objective is to create opportunities for dealers, help those dealers engage those customers, and ultimately convert those opportunities to business value. So we, offer, the majority of digital marketing and advertising solutions that are out there today for any business to the dealerships. We have over 90% of our dealers on our website platform. We have a choice-based digital advertising program. We have a direct communications program, one-to-one marketing to customers through direct mail and email. We have social media management, and we have a variety of in-store, dealer solutions like the inventory management and the CRM systems. And what this, and basically, what the really unique aspect of FordDirect is it brings the leadership of Ford Motor Company, of the dealership network, as well as all of our strategic partners to collaborate and share ideas, technology, investment, as well as data to provide the most compelling customer experience for vehicle sales and service to the dealers, and ultimately and continuously build customer loyalty for the Ford and Lincoln brands. So what we're going to talk about today is that choice-based advertising program that I mentioned that we call FordDirect Advantage. And we launched this about a year and a half ago for the dealers, and it essentially is a partnership between FordDirect and 6 of what we feel are some of the most sophisticated dealer digital advertising agencies that are in the industry. And what we're essentially allowing those dealerships to do is target those customers that are shopping on Ford.com and Lincoln.com and the Tier 2 portal, buyfordnow.com, being able to reach those customers who are ready for service, and being able to see all the spend and activity that's going on across the dealerships as well as across Ford, ultimately help make sure that we're spending the money efficiently from the aspect of if a customer purchases, that we suppress that and essentially don't waste that money for our customers no longer in market. And then since it's a choice-based model where we help tailor which of those digital advertising agencies are best for the dealer based upon their strategy, based upon their business size and things like that. And if at any time during their time on the program we need to switch those dealers between different agencies, we can do that, either due to the performance or a change in strategy. So we help broker that relationship. So the situation today that we're going to talk about is we just back up and if we think about automotive marketing for the automotive industry and for dealerships in general, what do you picture as a consumer? And hopefully it's this nice family portrait of Ford Broncos that might appear in your display advertising that you see when you're online, the landing pages of websites that you go to, or YouTube videos and things like that. It's also this exciting search results page, which is where the bulk of investment goes at both at the brand level as well as at the dealership level, to make sure that the right keyword bidding strategy is in place to ensure that the dealership's name appears where it should in that list when you're looking for your local Ford or Lincoln dealership. But when the dealers are thinking about their marketing and their advertising, it's an expensive balancing act, right? So the average dealer spends roughly $55,000 a month in advertising, or roughly $640 for each vehicle sold. If you think about that across all 3,800 dealerships, you got over $1 billion in advertising going out there into the market. And if you couple that with what Ford and Lincoln are spending, which is over another $1 billion plus in a year, you got $2 billion just from a brand advertising network competing for the same eyeballs across the tiers as well as across the competition. So from the dealer standpoint, they're trying to figure out, what's the right balance of spend and effort across those marketing channels to maximize their advertising return on investment. So the kind of questions that they're going to be asking, how much should my advertising budget be? How should that be spread across the major digital channels of search, social, and display paid media? How do they move beyond last click attribution to understand how each of those channels are contributing to leads and sales? What are the right search keywords that produce the best results? And which audiences are working well and with which digital publishers in the best way? So in order to answer those questions, it all comes down to the data that we hear all the time, all about the data about the customer and what they're doing in their journey. And the challenge for dealers as well as for their agencies is that they have a limited view of what that customer journey is because of the way they set up their marketing and advertising relationships and structure today, right? So you have customers coming into the dealership and interacting with them in person, taking test drives, coming in for service, and all that activity is being logged into the dealer's CRM systems, their customer management systems. You also have them shopping on Ford.com, Lincoln.com, and at Tier 2, which is that activity's traditionally been blind to the dealership. You have the advertising that one of our 6 Advantage partners is conducting on behalf of the dealer, where they're capturing customer behavior across those search, social, and display media channels. They have the dealership's website that's capturing activity as the customer is shopping for sales and service. There's thousands of mailers going out every day to all the automotive owners for service or for new vehicles as their leases are coming up, as well as email that's going out. And there's obviously, almost all dealerships have some sort of social media presence where that's also capturing reviews and reputation scores and things like that. And in terms of the Advantage program, which is strictly on the advertising side, the agencies are really able to see what the dealers or what the customers are doing, within their own ad platforms, how they're responding to the display advertising, the social advertising, and the search clicks. They're able to see that, and they're typically able to tag the dealership's websites as well, so that they can retarget those customers in their advertising. So they have a view of roughly 2 of these major areas that customers dwell in. But on the whole, for the dealership, this data is captured by their partners, it's stored by their partners, managed by their partners, and it's siloed for the dealer. As well, it's obviously going to be siloed for each of the individual agencies that run those different channels, and often those agencies compete with each other. And it's not like the dealership has, an expensive data lake or a sophisticated IT department to capture all this data from each of these different partnerships, bring it all together, stitch it together into a nice comprehensive view of the customer, as well as the data science to derive any meaning from it. So if the agencies were to try and do this, they're plagued with a lot of those same problems, like the data silos that I just mentioned. But even within their own analytics, where they have data about the customer within the advertising space or maybe on the website, they actually lack the attribution or the connection of that activity to transactional value at the dealership level, because that's essentially stored in what we would call, let's say, the dealership's ERP, which we call the DMS systems, and that data is pretty protected and secured within the dealership, and they don't often want to share that out with any outside entity. So there are some cases where agencies are able to grab that data, but it's usually an expensive prospect, and typically it's somewhat manual. And what they really need is that understanding of what's working and not working in an almost real-time manner, so that they can adjust their advertising on the fly. So that attribution to value is typically missing, from the agency standpoint. And also within the agencies themselves, they often lack the expertise in order to make better sense and capture the correct insights or the predictive value of what's going on with the customer, right? So they don't have necessarily the technology in place, they don't have the data engineering expertise in place, nor the data science expertise. So this is where FordDirect, comes into play and really helps out with the Advantage program in helping those agencies do a better job. And that really is based upon our unique data position. It's one of the main reasons I came to FordDirect years ago is, all of a sudden I realized that there's this company that captures, all the digital leads and all the phone calls that are happening across all these dealerships, either through the website as well as through Ford.com or Lincoln.com, and matches these leads to sales every night. And those sales, that data has to get transferred directly from the dealership to Ford, right? They have to let Ford know when vehicles left the lot. And so we just basically match those lead records to sales continuously. So we immediately have that transactional value and the information about a lead to a sale. And then if you essentially attribute that backwards up the chain to website activity, and then ultimately to the traffic that drove that website activity, which then allows you to connect to campaigns and different media activity, you have a pretty good full funnel view of the customer. And if you can start to link that to non-lead generating websites and things like that, you have an even better view of the customer. So from the FordDirect standpoint, because we provide the suite of digital marketing and advertising products, part of the agreement that we have with all of our partners that do that on behalf of the dealer is a direct data connection and feed to FordDirect. So we're able to see the customer behavior at the ownership level. We're able to see the customer shop. We're able to see what they're doing on Ford.com, as well as a lot of the ownership data that's stored there. And we have the leverage to work with third-party providers like Experian, like Nielsen, like Cox Automotive, to capture more information about the customer than just what we see in our own ecosystem. So we can augment the customer profile with that data, as well as what we're actually seeing in our own first-party data. So based upon that, we're able to use our platform with all that data that we have available, and now we're able to see that it's actually potentially the same customer that we just only could see in the advertising channel, and that is from the perspective of one of our Advantage partners. But we also are able to see what's happening on the dealer website, what's happening in store through the CRM systems that we provide. We're able to see what's going on with Ford.com based upon our relationship with Ford, as well as the direct communications program that we run for the majority of the dealers, as well as the social media activity. So now we're able to see that customer dwell across all those different channels. And if we stitch that together in a time series fashion, we essentially know where they are in the shopping funnel, and then we're able to do something about it, right? So that leads us to our first project, which is just within the media channel alone, because we have all those different signals, we're able to then apply a multi-touch attribution model to that so that we can start to weight what all those activities mean in terms of real value, since we're able to attribute all those different clicks and impressions and activity either on the website or in the paid media channel to that customer's transactional value. And then when we eventually bring that together with the whole journey of the customer, those weights will obviously change as well. But to start off with, just looking at the media side and the website activity, our first project with RXA is to essentially use that MTA model and allow that to feed a media mix optimization tool so that we can use those insights, give that to the 6 agency partners that are part of the Advantage program, and based on the activity that's happening across those 3,800 dealerships, start to effectively and accurately assign that credit across the media channels that allows us to optimize the media spend, that better informs the search keyword and bidding strategy. We understand the customer pathing, then that leads to greater outcomes, and essentially enhance the audiences that we currently provide a lot of those digital agencies, based more on the media, on the modeling insights, so that we know what activity is actually driving the most value. So at this point, I'm going to start to turn it over to John, who's going to walk us through the modeling construct that we're using today in our project, along with the tools that we've been building in the Domo platform and are now sharing with our advertising partners so that they can be more strategic. And John, I'm going to jump in here and there as you go along, as you go through the rest of the slides, so bear with me.
That sounds great, Tom. Happy to do that. So in thinking about the application that we employed here, the main thing to consider is really that concept of integration. Because just as Tom kind of explained, the consumer's experience of having that integrated media exposure from both the OEM, the regional partners, and the dealers, how FordDirect sits there and allows them to create the integration between what's happening at the dealership and the OEM level to bring those sales and leads together. We also wanted to synthesize within their environment and bring together a few different modeling solutions in order to develop something that was really impactful. Now, going into this, based on Tom's introduction, we saw the billions of dollars that get spent every year by dealerships. But there still were these misconceptions that we had to fight against going through this process. The first off is that dealer media isn't measurable. It's too dispersed. It happens at individual locations. We can only pick up brand media. That's the thing that resonates with people, that they're able to look at and really retain. And the dealer media is something that's not as measurable. And that tier 3 media is only focused on buying search terms. And while that is a large portion of the dealership strategy, just as it is for the OEM strategy, the real power comes from going beyond that and expanding the reach within the consumer. The other is that car sales aren't related to media spend. This isn't something that we can measure easily at point of sale, where people are exposed to our Facebook advertisement, they click through to Amazon, we're able to create that direct connection. But because of that lead process that Tom explained, we're actually able to use that as the goal and as the thing that we're driving, because the media is really driving that interest and that handoff to the dealership. And then once we're able to hand off those leads to the dealership, they can use all of their expertise, both in their individual marketplace and in the industry, to really bring those potential sales home and help close them. The final piece is that dealers can't optimize their spend because they're too small. And this is a concept that we hear not only from dealerships, but also just from small brands overall, that are they spending enough to really be able to pick up the impact of media and how that relates to their sales. And the thing with dealerships in particular is that because it's so geo-targeted, if we actually look at those billions of dollars that are being spent within local markets, we're able to very clearly see, levels of reach and frequency that allows us to get into this data and really dive into things. So with that, Tom, if we go on to talk about the first step in this progress. So as we're integrating these different approaches, the first one is multi-touch attribution. And so based on that tracking that Tom outlined, how we're able to see that vehicle sale, see that that was related to a lead, see what media that lead was exposed to beforehand, we're able to put that into those consumer paths. So we can see a consumer that submitted a lead and purchased an F-150. Prior to that, they initially searched for a generic term where they were looking for pickup trucks. Then we see later they were exposed to a display ad, a social ad, and then they came back in with a very specific search related to that dealership's name. We're able to compare everyone that had those same 4 touch points and see how many of them submitted leads, purchased vehicles versus those that did not purchase vehicles. And then we're able to compare that simultaneously to all of these other what if scenarios. So what would happen if they searched for that generic pickup, they saw the display ad, they didn't see the social, and then they had that search? How do the conversion rates compare for those 2 groups? What if they started off by seeing that display ad before the generic search term? How would that impact things for them? By looking at all of these simultaneously, we're actually able to create what's known as removal effect by taking each of those out individually to see how that changes their likelihood to purchase. And then that lets us take the credit for that sale and break it up appropriately across the individual touch points there. So one of the things that we saw is by integrating that website data that Tom mentioned, we're able to see that when that website data is within a path, it changes the impact of the media that follows it. So we're able to see that, if we were to take that same path we're looking at, generic search, display ad, social, if at that point they go to the dealer site, they look at an F-150, that is going to change the impact of that search term afterwards, as opposed to if they didn't do that. So we're able to, once again, integrate that data from the lead, from the purchase, from the website behavior, and from the media to get a very accurate representation. So now as we look across our search, we have the appropriate amount that's credited to search. As we look across display and social, we have the appropriate amount that's allocated to each of those. The most important aspect of that is that these are now additive. So we don't have search taking credit for everything that they've touched, social taking credit for everything they've touched, and display taking credit for everything that they've touched. That's something we often see when we integrate with different systems to bring the data in that's directly reported, and looking at the ROAS or different measures that your media providers may be supplying for you. That is looking at everything in isolation. So then we really can't add those together. In this case, we can. And so that allows us to do a lot of reporting. We're able to see how different types of search terms are performing, how different audiences for display and social are performing, to get some very tactical reporting on that lets us make those optimizations at that level. But it also enables us to set ourselves up for a more strategic approach that we get into with the media mix modeling. And so we're able to now take that total number of leads that were generated and now look at the media in the market. So we're now changing our frame of reference and our unit of analysis from that individual customer. Now we're looking to a dealership's performance within a month. And so we're able to see the media that they've spent. We're able to see the leads that were driven and the sales that were associated with those. So now we're able to look at these channels in concert, and then we can take that total number of leads, use that to decompose them back to the individual channels, so we can get a return on investment for spend over time. And more importantly than that, well, equally as importantly, I should say, we are able to get the relationships. So we're able to see how the dealer's spend is impacting their sales and how we're able to then get them to optimal levels of spending. With these modeling approaches, we're able to see how the different channels are interacting with each other. So as we're putting more into social, how does that change the effectiveness of our search? How does that change the effectiveness of our search for different types of terms? Are we looking at retargeting media different than brand building media? What are the different ways that all of these strategies interact with one another? And it's able to capture these nonlinearities in the data, so we're able to isolate any of these individual channels and really understand the level at which dealerships are spending. And the main thing that we get out of this are kind of these 3 points along the curve. So if we imagine this as the number of leads that are generated by a generic dealership based on their spend in search media, let's say. So there are these 3 key points along there. The first is that breakthrough level. And that's the level before which you really haven't reached these economies of scale. So you are doing a little bit of spending in this channel. We'll often see this with things like social and display. Dealerships may be search focused, they'll put a little bit in there, but they really haven't reached enough eyeballs yet for that to make a difference. So we want to ensure that dealerships are above that breakthrough level. Then we have this kind of optimal spending point. We think of this as that point in the S curve that's really the middle, which everything revolves around. And that will give us our highest overall return on investment because we've reached those economies of scale, but we haven't yet reached points of diminished returns. As we leave this optimal point, we're starting to see lower marginal ROIs, but we still see strong returns here until we get up to that point of diminished return and that saturation point. Because once we hit saturation point, then as we continue to spend in this channel, then we're not really getting the return that we see. And this is one of the hardest things when it comes to talking to dealerships about search, because there is an inherent fear that if they don't buy those terms, someone else will. And so even if they are, very far extended in any time frames, so looking at that even on a daily basis, they're afraid to let any of those go. But we're often able to show them how we can bring these things together to make it more impactful by reallocating some of that spend.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go right ahead, Doug.
I was just going to say, this is a very powerful slide because it really dispels a lot of common and traditional notions around media spend, especially when it comes to the dealerships. So there is a lot of, let's say, a bit of paranoia involved in how they make their decisions on what they spend their money on. If we can bring the science to the table and actually show them how it's going to affect their lead volume, which ultimately is going to affect their sales by spending either too much or too little in a particular channel, that's basically what resonates with dealers most and very easily. They understand the language of leads, they understand the language of sales, and later on service volume, RO volume, and the revenue associated with that. So getting to the point about these more complex strategies around where you should be spending, breakthrough levels, optimal, search saturation. Saturation just means you're spending too much in search, spend it somewhere else where you're going to get more leads, or mix it in different ways. Go ahead, John.
Oh, thank you, Tom. And to that point, thinking about how that's unique for each dealer as we move on to the next slide, going across all of those 3,800 dealers that Tom mentioned, we broke them into kind of these 5 main groups based on their market size, the cost of media within that environment, and the overall sales volume of their store. So while we see essentially the levels clustered in similar points, for some types of markets, we see they'll reach a saturation point earlier. Larger markets, higher cost markets, we'll see that later. So across each of the different channels and for each of these different dealer groups, we've been able to estimate these points. And they lead us to, on the next slide, kind of these 3 main aspects that we look at as we look across the sales performance.
So I just want to say one more thing about this too. So when we're trying to explain this to digital agencies, right, they also have their own notions on how they best figure out spend levels or the mix for the dealerships that are essentially their customers. And they do some level of segmentation across, especially if they have over 50 or 100 dealers, right? So they'll do it sometimes based upon search impression share. There's only 30% impression share for this dealer, there's 60% for this dealer, so I'm going to adjust the spend accordingly across search, social, and display. They might do it based upon how good of a relationship they have with the dealer, which is almost like a listening effect. How well does the dealer listen to us, as an agency? and they'll segment them in that way. And so we're trying to bring these other attributes to segmentation around, what's their cost look like in their area, what's their, business, what's the business aspects about the dealer, to which we have all the data for as well. So it's really having a collaborative conversation with each of those agencies to figure out, where does each dealer fit in these new segmentation categories, and do we add or subtract attributes to each of those to ensure that we're talking about the right breakthroughs, optimal levels, and saturation points for the right groups of dealers.
Exactly, Tom. And that's where we kind of then try to simplify the strategy by really focusing those conversations with dealerships around, 3 main points. We saw those 3 points within the curve, and then we can boil those down to different strategies. So where we're able to kind of maximize the return for the dealers. So this is, moving it to that optimal level where we've reached that economy of scale, but haven't had that marginal decline on efficiency. So we're able to get the best ROI from there. Where we seek to optimize the number of leads. So obviously with inventory constraints being as they are now, this is not a strategy that a lot of dealers are employing, but once that inventory comes back online and they have all of that built up demand in the marketplace, this is where we can take them right up to before that saturation point. So they're able to see if they want to take advantage of it at that time and bring the most customers in, they're able to do that. Whereas now they may be focused more on trying to get, that strong return for every dollar they're spending. And then we also have this kind of suggested optimization level. And what that does is it takes us past that optimal point, but up to the point where we really start to see the diminished return. So we have slightly less impactful marginal ROI, but what we see at this point is by going beyond just that optimal return, we're able to drive many more leads and many more sales for a dealership with only a slight increase in their cost per lead. And so using this, as Tom said, to work with the agencies, we're able then to show them, across their breakdown of dealers that they have, all of them having a slightly different makeups of those segments that we have and what types of dealerships they work with. We're able to, focus in on something like search, show them, okay, what percentage of their dealers have reached that breakthrough level, how many are at that optimal level, how many have reached, are past that and up to the saturation level. And so as we see here, we can see that a lot of partners are still kind of working with their dealers. They may have smaller dealerships that are less inclined to spend, especially in current times. We have other partners that have success at getting those dealers up to their breakthrough level, having a good disposition there. But we're able to use this to really help generate those conversations that help guide the agencies, that then help guide the dealers to ultimately drive, more leads and sales for everyone.
Yeah, and this is really where, we're putting the models in action, right? We're trying to tell a compelling story as far as like where the majority of the dealers fall in terms of whether or not they're spending enough in each channel based upon the segments that they've been placed in and how they compare against the other agencies that are also doing the same thing. So there's a bit of a competitive nature to this. We're seeing quite a bit more red now than we normally would see, even though this data is not it's been doctored to protect, but at the same time it is a typical view of what we're seeing right now. A lot of dealers have pulled back on spend overall because they don't have cars to sell. Totally makes sense, but this is the type of visuals that we're putting in place. So when that inventory comes back, we're able to see, are they spending the right amounts in the right channels, and are they not spending too much, and are they as close to optimal as we can get them? Obviously, our first goal is to get them past the breakthrough levels so that their dollars are actually creating the right amount of value to begin with.
Okay, and then so thinking about kind of the how of this, it really is something that we deployed through Domo. And once again, it's about integrating different capabilities. We're able to use the SQL and the ETL processes to join this disparate data together to be able to create that unified view of the customer. able to run models, utilize those coefficients to score things, and then we're able to in the same platform kind of deploy that into visualizations. And so this is just kind of, a quick snapshot of that first basic principle that we were talking about, the reporting. We're able to look across this, kind of see what an accurate value of our leads are by tying those correct leads to the media so that we get the return on investment that we would expect. And we're able to really see the interplay between that more awareness-based media, like display and social, that are focused around audiences, how that really helps make that search media more efficient, and how the search really benefits from that prior exposure.
Yeah, and this is usually what we would call table stakes dashboard view, really trying to start the conversation with one of our digital agencies. Here's how we see how the channels are driving leads and sales today with our straight attribution. Here's what it looks like when the model's applied, right? So obviously, in most, 99% of the cases, some of the influence of search comes down and more credit starts to go to social and display. And here's how, just a view of how we can see that from a leads and a sales standpoint.
And then this is an example of where it really kind of comes to life, because we're able to let agency select an individual dealership that they want to have a conversation with, auto-populate it with their kind of typical spending levels, so they're able to see the average number of leads that they get, what that cost per lead is, and the sales associated with that. Then by really showcasing where that dealer lies across the different spend points, we're able then to let the partner be able to move those around, use those sliders to see what it would do if they were to move things up to higher spend level, decrease spend in one channel, and also move to kind of these key points where we're able to maximize leads, bringing us up towards that saturation point, bring us to the maximization of return where we're at kind of that optimal level, or to bring us to that suggested optimization that takes us right up to the point of diminishing return. And then it allows them very easily to see, as they move their spend to these different levels, not only how that influences the number of sales that they have, but how that changes their cost per lead. So where they can go to really increase those sales while that cost per lead stays at a comfortable level for them.
Yeah, and then this by far is my favorite. One of my favorite Domo dashboard views that I've seen in my career. This is, where you take the data science, you've got two models working together. A lot of people talk about multi-touch attribution, multi-touch. So what does that really mean? Well, okay, so you're weighting individual touch points towards some common goal, right? So the model constructs that for you. But it's, what do you do with it, right? So this is a great example of doing something with those results, right? You feed that to a media mix optimization model, which then allows you to visualize some sort of tool, put the modeling results into action, and to where a user can either adjust how they want to spend in each individual channel manually, and if they do that, it'll immediately give them some sort of value result from that, right? So the volume of leads, the cost for each of those leads will change, and then the sales estimate is based upon the going close rate for leads, right? Depending upon whether it's a phone call or a form lead or a chat lead or something like that. Or, if they want to make it simple for themselves, and this is they have a high volume of dealers, you have a smaller strategy team inside the agency, and you want to just input the total amount of budget that the dealer has per month. They click one of those three buttons above: maximize leads, maximize return, or optimize between the two. Click the button and let the money ride. So we have this in the hands of the users right now. They may make some adjustments to it from a usability standpoint. They may want to add some features to that, so we'll be flexible to do it. But the underpinnings and the guts of this is really like put the data science into action. I think that's probably a goal you want to set for yourself if you ever try to do any kind of complex data science, is what does it look like to the user if this is going to be a human interacted a human interaction with the results of a data science model, right? When we talked about some of those other things where you may use AI and machine learning, it might just be sending signals to another system that decides what, like the personalized experience might be to the customer, maybe based upon a multi-touch attribution along with a propensity model. And a propensity model is going to tell you, these are the different common pathways historically that work for this customer in this channel. So pick from these 3 options. And there's a way to automate all that. So, start with your business case. Start with, how are you going to use the results and how are you going to turn it into something that is powerful. And a simulator like this is a great example of that. John, are you taking this slide?
Oh, certainly, Tom. So looking at some of the insights that came out of that, one thing that we found was that, search still using that attribution model was one of the top drivers of leads. It was still by far kind of the bulk of the touch points that we had and received the bulk of the credit. But what we saw was that the number of leads that were credited to display and social increased by 25% and 33% respectively. So that's one of those things, just like when we were talking about, going from kind of that optimal return up to that point of diminished return, we don't see very much of a decrease in that, or an increase, I should say, in that cost per lead. With this, we didn't see much of a difference in terms of the search, but it did have a very strong impact on display and social, really helping to show the value of those programs that historically have just always been undercredited in their performance. And as I mentioned earlier, the ability to integrate the lead information along with the media information and that website activity. So here we have that VDP of that vehicle detail page. We really saw that had this recharging effect on media, where it was able to make it be more valuable than it would be without that interaction. Logically, that makes sense, but to have the data tell you that and to be able to quantify the increase that search has after that website visit is one of the things that's key, because not only does it reinforce what we know, but it puts a quantity around something that has always been intangible before.
Right, so you hear a lot of times in digital advertising, marketing, or just marketing advertising in general, sort of the halo effect of different behaviors and how they influence the value of subsequent behaviors, right? So that's what's happening here in this sort of network effect, and that's one of the coolest things about the model I find is like the combination of touch points together and how the overall weighting of the individual touch points change and the probability of value or probability to transact changes as well based upon the mix of touch points in the data.
Exactly, and that mix of,
Sorry.
I was just going to say that mix of touch points, how they interact with each other was kind of the last main thing that really popped out with that. Looking at, search spend, seeing that lost some efficiency but didn't reach the saturation point. So we can kind of now picture where that is on the S curve versus something like social where we didn't see that decrease because we're still in the lower part of that curve. We haven't quite hit those ceilings yet. And then seeing how search has those interactions, both with display spend and social spend, making them work more efficiently.
All right. Thank you both. I think we have time for one question, and it's from one of our panelists, Balin Springer. How often do you recommend a refresh/refit of the MTA analysis and MMM?
I'm going to turn that over to you, John.
So with the MTA analysis, that's something that you get a wealth of data in just a short period of time. So that's one that we tend to update as we're integrating more data in, and we tend to do that pretty much twice a year. So we'll be able to bring that in as we're able to integrate more sources because of the way FordDirect is set up to provide that holistic view of the customer. As we start to bring in CRM information or other information, that allows us to go back, kind of refresh those relationships. And then the media models are something that are updated annually, because that gives us enough of a basis to see how things like the saturation points, the ad stock decays, and all of that changes over time.